Okay, you're right. There are many more great deals at the Steam Strategy Festival, running now through September 4. Let's take a look. And my first one is Age of Wonders 4. At 20% off, brings it down to around $40 US. Of course, a quick note that regional pricing does vary, as you can see, in comparison to New Zealand dollars at least, by quite a lot, depending on where you live. Back to the task at hand though. Age of Wonders 4, 20%. You might be thinking, not a huge discount. Why put it first? Well, the reason is that this is the first time that Age of Wonders 4 has seen a discount at all. The highly customizable, at least in terms of your race and character creation, 4X strategy game with a hint of RPG thrown in the mix and turn-based tactics when it comes to its combat, is for the first time on special on Steam. Again, it's a relatively new game, it only came out in May, and now we're seeing it on special for the first time. It's not the only option that you have inside of the Age of Wonders franchise though, but I should note it's by far the newest one, and of course you'll tend to probably find more interest in things like modding and that kind of thing if you're really interested in playing on PC with the most recent title. That being said, before we move on to the next recommendation, I should quickly note that Age of Wonders 3 and Planetfall are both 75% off, so if you want to dip your toes into the water, this might be the way to do it. The next entry on my list, by far the most requested, it's Stellaris. It's 70% off. It brings this bad boy down to about $13. Stellaris is probably one of the best sci-fi strategy, grand strategy games out there, if not the best. It's certainly the most popular. It continues to be the most popular. Receives DLC around every 3 months, and that is something to note if you're thinking about picking it up. Starting with the base game is easy, but there's plenty more DLC where that came from. Hearts of Iron 4, by the way, is also a great pickup from Paradox if you're a little bit more interested in the World War II setting, and that's also 70% off. Around 24 hours ago, we had this many subscribers, and since I put out a call, we now have this many. So thank you to the 400-ish people who joined us in the last day in our mission to make it to 6666666. I say that for your enjoyment, not my own. Back to the video. Next, it's Songs of Conquest. At 50% off, this little hidden gem is about $11. And if you're a fan of a franchise like, for example, Heroes of Might and Magic, then you'll fit right inside of Songs of Conquest. Early access, indie development game, a very smooth and fluid experience though. Don't let the classic style graphics put you off. There's a really smooth engine in behind this game that makes things like the animations and interacting with the user interface very enjoyable, at least in my experience. The combat itself is turn-based. It incorporates a variety of units with buffs and magic. And the magic, which is fueled by different essences with different sort of units or unit types feeding you that essence currency, is a really crucial part of the combat, which again ties together those wonderfully fluid animations, etc., to present a nice modern form of this game. You'll walk around the map, find gear, get settlements, and ultimately be fleeing an enemy. And as you go through, you'll progress through the campaigns, they'll become more difficult. There's loads of other options as well. It's important to note multiplayer options, battle options, where you can do what I'm doing here and set up a team and fight against another one, whether it's an AI opponent or online against another player. But really the game's strength, I believe, lies in its single-player experience. At least that's where I've put most of my time. Walking around a campaign map, upgrading my settlements, and ultimately trying to achieve some sort of objective to ultimately complete the campaign. I think it's a little hidden gem, an easy recommend for me. Another easy recommend is Against the Storm. At 35% off, it brings it down to a fairly attractive price for this game at about $15-ish. So what is it? Well, it's probably one of the best combination games. A combination of a real-time strategy game that is essentially a base builder and a roguelike experience. And you can see that here with this reputation bonus. You can see it here again with my orders. These are ultimately the objectives for a level or a mission or a campaign, whatever you want to call it, inside of Against the Storm, where you start in a small area, sort of randomly get some rewards, some offers, some objectives for this playthrough. And then you begin to collect resources, get your villagers, each with their own sort of different styles and needs, work your way through a tech tree again with those roguelike elements involved. And the reason why they're so important is because it means that every mission, every campaign inside of this game is different. As you move through, you'll unlock these sort of glades as you're cutting through the forests to reveal the fog of war, and inside of those there'll be new resources, resource caches, missions to send your villagers on, dangers, and so much more. Complete the level, race against the storm. Ultimately, of course, you're fighting against progress, your progress versus a timer that's slowly ticking down to impress the Queen, and then move through for another one inside of a much grander strategic board. It's a wonderful game, and I can highly, highly recommend it. The next entry on my list, Galactic Civilizations 3, at 35% off, brings this game down to around $15. Now, it has since been replaced, or sort of superseded, I should say, by Galactic Civilizations 4, but if you don't mind the slightly more classic feel, this is where the best deal lies inside of this game. Now, unlike Stellaris, although this game is still very grand, this one is more of a 4X game, and you will have seen that from the classic Hex overview. This is much more of a 4X sci-fi game than a grand strategy game. Again, though, that's not to take away from its scale, because it still delivers a fairly impressive scale. There's customization options, community modding options, so on and so forth, that sort of surround, ultimately, a fairly satisfying 4X experience. I think it's a fairly easy recommend, but not for everybody. And maybe Xenonauts 2 also falls into that slightly rare category. That's why there are more recommendations inside of this one. It's a 3 for 1. But let's start with Xenonauts 2. 25% off, brings it down to around $30. What is it? Well, essentially, this is a kind of XCOM game. Turn-based tactics where you send your troops in with gear that you've upgraded for them, research that you've stolen or acquired from the aliens, and you're jumping into these turn-based missions to try and complete an objective. Maybe it's destroy the aliens, maybe it's secure some intel and equipment to ultimately, of course, protect humanity and save the world. That's the goal here. Of course, your soldiers can perish, indeed many of mine did, and so too can the enemies. Once you make it back to base, there's all kinds of other things, of course, for you to engage with, like researching new weapons and new vehicles, building new bases around the world, which sort of operates in this real-time, day-by-day phase, and then you jump into your tactical missions, and time freezes around you. Ultimately, Xenonauts 2 came out not that long ago. This is a relatively new game, and so 25% off is a pretty good discount for it. However, it hasn't faced entirely rosy criticism. Some criticism around this game has suggested that actually it's a bit too similar to Xenonauts 1, which is why I thought inside of this video I'd give you options. If you're looking for the newest, shiniest, most gloriously animated, etc. experience, then 2 is for you. However, Xenonauts 1 is down to around $5 US. It has a slightly different look to it, a slightly different feel to it, but fundamentally, these two games are, as you'd expect, very similar. And of course, XCOM 2 at 90% off. I'd recommend you grab as much XCOM as you can if you're interested in this kind of thing, because XCOM 2 is the godfather of the genre. Next up, Anno 1800 at 75% off. This city builder is down around 15 US bucks. Now, what is this game all about? Well, if you're unfamiliar, the Anno franchise more broadly is a fairly popular, not just city builder, that's actually a bit of an understatement. This is much more of a simulation game. An economic simulator, trade simulator, combat simulator, you probably get the idea. But of course, the fundamental gameplay is grounded in this, city building. Although, I would be remiss to not mention the fact that there's a much more sort of larger living world around the Anno franchise, and in particular around Anno 1800 than others. This includes things like missions and interacting with other characters and other players. I think it's a really smooth, satisfying, Industrial Revolution era city builder, and an easy recommend for me at 75% off. The next item on our list, a slightly lower discount at 15%, bringing it down to around $20. This is Farthest Frontier. Farthest Frontier, at least in this video, is probably one of the more core city builders. City skylines, of course, not on special in this sale. Now, this one has a particular focus around survival. The idea is that you're not only building a city, but then allowing your populations to thrive. There's of course also a real focus on raw materials, gathering those materials, crafting, trading, consuming. I think you get the idea. Farthest Frontier has some of the better polish around it than many other titles, especially considering, at least within this genre, that it's still in early access. I would note, however, that it came into early access a little over or roughly a year ago, so it's been there for a wee while now. However, it has continued to receive updates, and hopefully it will continue in the future. I think it's a great city builder. Next, an easy recommend like Stellaris. This is Age of Empires 2, the definitive edition, at 75% off, brings it down to about $5. And this is the RTS game that never dies. I mean, really. If you don't already own this, and I'm assuming you do, so I'm going to keep this section relatively brief, and you like real-time strategy, then you're gonna really like this. Build up a little civilization, more of a little town than anything. Upgrade, get your tech, get your defensive buildings, get your boats out there, and have some really fun military combat. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to just turtle up and build a wonder, or what have you. This is the king of real-time strategy, but of course it's not alone. Age of Empires 4 is much more modern, and at a slightly lower discount of 50% off, comes in at about $20 for the sale. Of course, yes, you may also play this on your Xbox Game Pass, like other things inside of these kinds of videos, so I tend to not focus on that. I'm assuming if you're watching these, you're more interested in buying things and having them on Steam. For open betas, for trophies, whatever your purpose is, literally just to own the thing. That's not really my business, but ultimately I wanted to conclude by saying that this is a more modern and polished experience, if that's what you're after. Next on my list, Northguard. 70% off, $7. From Shadow Games, Northguard is a very interesting territory by territory approach to real-time strategy. A game of Northguard is fairly approachable. Like Against the Storm earlier, maybe you're spending 45 minutes inside of a game, give or take. That means you can sit down, play it, pick it up fairly easily, and then move away, unlike some of the larger commitments inside of these videos, like Terra Invicta last time, for example. You are limited a little bit in what you can do inside of each territory, and of course each one presents either its own challenges or rewards in the form of resources and enemies. You will, of course, also face other enemies, other clans, as you move through to try and take over and become dominant inside of this little map, this little level. It's a really enjoyable game. It's slightly challenging, loads of DLC. I think you'll like it. 2 gems at the end of this video to reward you for still being here. Timberborn at 20% off, brings it down to around $19. This is an early access title as well, but my goodness is it great. It has trended over time to an overwhelmingly positively reviewed status on Steam. That's 95% or better. In this world where humans no longer exist and it's all about beavers, you will ultimately build a city, a colony. The systems behind it are brilliant. The way that it uses rivers and water to enhance your engineering is fantastic. It's got this sort of lumber punk style design to it, and the gameplay systems are very smooth. I can highly recommend this city builder. And the final entry on my list, Frostpunk. 20% off. No, we're not impressed by crappy discounts like that. This one is 80% off, bringing it down to around $5 US. The overwhelmingly positively reviewed game came out in 2018. It's a city builder and a pretty harsh sort of resource management and survival simulator as well. I remember PC Gamer described it as tough to play, but even tougher to stop. And with Frostpunk 2 on the horizon, like Endzone, a game that we covered last time, where Endzone 2 is also on the horizon, I think that now is a brilliant time to pick it up for a very low price and have a bit of fun. Thank you so much for joining me today, everybody. The Steam Strategy Festival's running now through September 4, so if you want to grab your deals, now's the time.